went in and changed it.
I have
Ooh,
permission.
who had the
Probably
power?
because I was the first person to get on.
Oh, maybe.
Maybe that'd be interesting. That gave you like
Yeah.
host power. Huh.
Interesting.
Well, fun. Who posted the video last week? Did Marcel come back and do that, or did someone else do it?
I think I started it last week, and then I went in and updated the meeting update to just have a new URL, but I set everyone as hosts in the event that I'm out or whatever. But I think that's an interesting observation, Daniel. It could be that you were the first one in, and therefore you've been given all the power. We'll have to test that.
Yeah, I wasn't sure who took the liberty of uploading it to Unfiltered. I didn't think about doing it, so I was curious who ended up doing it because it's there in the
It
agenda.
was me.
Thank you.
I did it.
Appreciate
Sure.
that. Good work, Holly.
Thanks.
So
Maybe we can make that just a small task at the end of each of our meetings. Just someone will take
Yeah.
the responsibility for it.
That's a good idea.
I'll do that this week.
Does everyone have 1 or 2 invites for this meeting? Was I late to the game? Is that what was being discussed?
I have 2, but actually I seem to have 3. And one is for the UX calendar. One is something that I guess it's just my calendar. And then there's a third, and I'm not sure why.
Yeah, because the only one I have is for the UX calendar, which has me as declined, but I can't accept that meeting. Like it doesn't give me the option.
Yeah, I've had that problem before with other meetings, and I think you have to be removed from the UX and then re-invited in the UX, then it sends you a new invite on both occasions, I think, or however it works. I think that's how, because I had the exact same problem.
Can someone help me with that then? I mean, not we don't have to do it during this meeting, but I have 1 invite and I'm able to access the Zoom link and the Google Doc, but it just has me as declined.
You and I are meeting in a bit. I'm happy to, if you want just a second pair of eyes, I don't know how much I can help, but I'm happy to try.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I would appreciate it. Okay. First on the
So the question I had on the agenda was, there had been a thread a while back in the UX channel about using decision trees in documentation. I think initially it was Jeremy just sharing like a decision tree on like when to use, maybe it was like radio buttons or checkboxes or toggles. Maybe it's toggles or checkboxes. And then Alexis had linked a pretty cool blog in which there was a decision tree on whether to use a modal or like an in-page form or a non-modal component. So I just took whatever information was in that decision tree and put into a mermaid diagram. And I was considering creating an MR to add that to pajamas and then iterate on like how it would make sense to refine it further. Like my biggest thing I don't really understand is there's like 4 questions, and I'm like, if I say yes to any of these, does that send me down one track, or is it like just, is it majority yes or majority no? I don't really know the exact situation, but yeah, I was trying to like convert it to make sense for pajamas because they were using terms that didn't necessarily align directly to pajamas. Like sheet was one of the outcomes. I was like, we don't have a sheet, but we would call that a drawer. So I was curious if y'all thought it would be helpful if that was documented in pajamas, like when should we use a modal versus when we should not use a modal.
I think it's good to have. I don't know why we would use mermaid versus a visual, more nice representation. I'm assuming it's just because it's part of the system that automatically reads mermaid code. I don't like mermaid diagrams because they're not nice. But otherwise, yes.
Fair. Yeah, I don't think they're pretty. I think the benefit of them is they are pure markdown. So that helps us a little bit with, I guess, blobs and not having to deal with images.
Are they searchable?
That's a
I wonder.
great question. I'm not sure.
That would be helpful. If so, that would be another plus, I think, for using them over an
Yeah.
image. But Daniel, you're the second person in 3 days that I've heard say, I don't like mermaid diagrams because they're just not attractive. And I agree.
Yeah. Yeah, I found myself wanting to like try and customize how it looked, and it was not a good time. So I just went with as vanilla as possible.
Let the ugly stay ugly.
Yeah, but I guess that brings more to the surface, like the meat of the diagram is what's probably the most important. Like if it's not actually useful, then there's no real point in making it look good. So
I love your thinking though of offering some sort of decision tree approach to some of these kinds of questions. Was it kind of a two-part question then of should we use the mermaid diagram to do this, or should we do this and then separately should we use a mermaid diagram to do this?
yeah, I guess the first question is like, do you all think it'd be useful to have something like this in pajamas, whether it's a mermaid diagram or some other visual chart that looks better? I thought it would be useful, but I guess this was my quick gut check of whether or not I should even bother opening up an MR and creating a page for it or something, or heck, even like what page would I add it to, like the modal page or something else? I don't know. Components? Who
I feel
knows?
there's a need for this sort of explanation for a number of things, like error message. So I'm in the middle of writing a new, well, not writing a new thing on the handbook yet, but I'm creating a new error message because the current error messages aren't scary enough for this particular action. So I'm having to use a modal because it's like pops up saying, you're going to do this, it's going to be bad, instead of just a little warning at the top, right? So, I mean, these kinds of decisions don't just apply to that.
Yeah, I almost wonder if it needs to be something that we have in every component eventually, because everything has the potential, it seems like, to have some sort of unique use case. An example that comes to mind for me was a modal recently, in which case we were asking people about canceling a comment, and then there's the cancel button as part of the cancel this comment, which was causing some confusion. But the long story short was that there was a title in the modal, and we didn't have an option in pajamas to have a modal without a title. And so then there's the separate question of when do you need a title and when do you not? And so it seems like you could have that situation with any of our components at some point.
I would probably bring it up with the foundation's open hours.
That's a great point.
Like, hey,
yeah,
there's this thing. A number of people are having this decision tree problem, and should this apply to other components beyond just my one that I'm proposing? Part of like the thinking of as we design the component, or as we first on the design from the foundation side and second on the implementation for everyone else's side, is that something that needs to be part of the process in making components.
Well, and could we also look at like what's Material doing, what's IBM, what are all these huge design systems?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
And not spin our wheels so much as, you know, just piggyback on a lot of the research that they've already done and see if it works.
what that blog was highlighting, the one that Alexis had shared in Slack, is that the design systems aren't telling people what to do necessarily. Like they're providing all the components for it, but there's no like guideline on like when or when not to use a modal necessarily. Like it'll give you some like general best practices, but then it gets kind of sticky. Like if you think about, okay, we're creating an object, like let's say it's creating a token or creating a user or something. Should you create that user or that token in a modal, in a new page, in an inline form, in a drawer? Well, there's not like a perfect answer. So I guess my hope would be this decision tree would land us on a consistent experience. So like in Daniel's example, there's a question that says like, is your content an important warning that's preventing or correcting a critical error? Like, sounds like a great case for a modal. You say yes, that's where you land.
Can we just bring it back? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just thinking, can we then just go back to the fundamentals, like the heuristic evaluation? Like, you know, I don't know, just to, I don't know, I'm trying to mitigate the amount of like back and forth. Well, I feel it should be this, I feel it should be that. Like, is there a standard, like the heuristic evaluation that we can go by and say, you know, yes, this fits
Yeah,
in the evaluation.
I think that's what I want, is to have more objectivity into it. But like I brought this up in the foundations conversation one time, because there were several pages with the form in the same page as like the table, specifically like protected branches or creating access tokens, those kinds of things already have the form there. And when I brought up the idea of using a modal, it was like, oh, I don't like that, because I like being able to see everything at one time. I'm like, okay, but you could say that about literally everything in GitLab, and we don't put everything on the same page. And sometimes we direct users to a new page altogether. So like when you create a label, you get directed to a new page. So then it's like, well, did you need to be redirected to a new page? Could you have used the modal? I think because there aren't, the heuristics from like Nielsen Norman don't define like what to do here. I think that's why a decision tree might help in that situation, is to like take out some of the subjectivity of saying, well, I like being able to see everything at the same time, and instead it moving it towards like, do users need to see the content of the table below in order to complete the task of filling out that form? But I think Daniel's on the right track. I'll open a small MR and then like put it in the foundations agenda to talk about and see if it gets anywhere.
I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, thanks for the feedback.
Enterprise tables.
Yeah. All right. So basically what I would like y'all's opinion on is how to best socialize this major change in our tables in a way that, again, kind of mitigates the back and forth, like, well, should we do this? Should we do this? Or I feel it should be this way. I feel it should be this way. So, and I linked an example of where this back and forth kind of an example of how this could happen. You know, like let me share my screen. I'm sorry, y'all. 1 second. Okay. So basically, in a nutshell, we kind of, a few of us were going back and forth, like, well, what is the intermittent checkbox? What does that actually mean? It's confusing to me, yada, yada, yada. Well, the work that I've done specific to import in regards to enterprise tables stems from work that Andy had done a while back. And I know that I'll link all of these. I apologize, these aren't linked into the agenda, but Andy had already started kind of doing this massive exploration on how we can use enterprise tables at GitLab. So I know a lot of his work stemmed from material. I don't know how much so, and since he's on paternity leave, where I am stuck is, how do I socialize this with the UX team in a concise way that we're not necessarily arguing whether or not we should have like an intermittent checkbox and what that actually means and how the user interprets that, because material has spent a lot of time designing their tables to reflect what can be used in Gmail, which Gmails use 1 out of 4 people across the globe. So my whole thing is, let's copy exactly what material has done, yet socialize it with the UX group to say, is there anything missing from what material has already done? If so, how do we implement it? Or do we even need it to be in the table? Like, does that make sense? Sorry, I'm a little flustered when talking about this, but I hope I'm coming across as clear.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I would argue that it's copying or basically utilizing what they've already done makes the most sense, because they probably spent a lot of money on it, a lot more than we have, for example.
Yeah.
And so doing anything in terms of like how can we tweak it or make it better. I don't know about that. I think that's maybe overthinking it.
Yeah.
But I do think having like feature parity between them would make sense because, as you stated, like this sort of thing works in such a huge use case and across so many use cases. I think it would make sense to have it just as a basis of the function of the table.
Yeah, and it's just familiarity, like, you know.
Yeah, you don't have to relearn anything.
Yeah, exactly. So, so with that being said, how do you all suggest going about? Because I just want to make sure that whatever we implement can be used across the entire product. I also, this is a huge development effort potentially, so I don't even know how then to spread this out across multiple developers, or, I mean, I'll get to that point, I guess. But really I'm looking for any suggestions on how to socialize what material is already done with the UX team in a really quick, easy way. My thought was I can go back and check all of Andy's work to see if it is one-to-one comparison with material, or in some cases, I might just screenshot. I was thinking just taking a screenshot of what material has on their website, posting it to a feedback issue and saying, hey, is there anything missing from this table functionality? If so, what and why? So basically, I'm looking for how do I get feedback from this massive, all of these little features that
Is the focus just on the checkboxes, or is it also around the filters and search and everything too?
everything that's associated with taking our tables to kind of the enterprise level, which we don't currently have. So it's like a massive thing,
yes.
But go ahead, Austin.
I was gonna say, I feel like starting with one component at a time would probably be the easiest thing to do. So a component that isn't in GitLab UI yet, but although it exists in GitLab, I think in different places, like you were showing, is like the checkbox and the intermediate state.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think first it could start with a change to pajamas to document how the states should toggle. And then it would make sense to me that there'd be a GitLab UI project like issue to then implement that as a part of our library.
Okay.
Because that checkbox exists in our pajamas Figma library, but getting your developers to implement it can be a pain depending on what table they've implemented on a page. If it's not like one of the ones that has that as an easy state to add to it, or like as an easy control, then it's going to be a really big pain. So to me, it seems like you just need to slice it into individual pieces and then try and work your way to that like holistic picture. So maybe this is an epic that has a collection of issues. One's for the checkboxes, one's for the filtering options, one's for the search bar, and you can call that whole component something if you'd like.
Yeah,
but
that's exactly what I was thinking, is reduce everything to one quote unquote simple thing. So like the checkbox, draggable columns, different, zebra coloring, right? And the way you say like you want to socialize it to make sure everyone understands or sees it, I think that might be, I mean, you've already done it, you've already mentioned it in the comment and you've had feedback, but the only other way would be to say bring it up in a UX weekly, or just say, hey, here's a new MR, here's a new feature, I did it, and that's what it is, and then let people provide feedback and say, oh no, it's on fire, we don't like it, and have, that's where the conversation comes in.
Yeah, that's what I did.
Not the best way, but that's the way GitLab works, because it's, you know, so iterative. They want you to go ahead and take the initiative of making the change on good faith that it's a good proposal, and the number of checks to go through a final MR approval kind of would catch any of that. So I would just say, as first, like Austin said, first break everything down to specific individual things, make this one big epic, because I know there's been a number of stuff that's been done elsewhere. Like I was thinking about draggable columns Nick was talking about this, years ago when we first both got hired on. It's just an ongoing thing that nobody's ever really taken initiative to really just do it. And I think it's kind of just the way it needs to just be done.
And we have to have enterprise table capabilities in our product. Okay, this is good feedback. So create an epic and then take all of, the specific attributes of that enterprise table and break those down into issues, and then just be like,
I would just use this one, actually promote this to an epic. I mean, it's closed right now, but I don't know if you want to reopen it, or if we can reopen it, promote it to an epic, and then just break every one of those off individually. And so
all of
this
these.
is this one. Here's this one.
Okay.
Also,
Okay.
great to talk to foundations about it too. I think that's another great thing you can bring up in office hours. Tori and Jeremy and everybody would love to talk about it. Jarek.
Yeah. And that is coming up next. Okay. Yeah.
Comes up on Thursdays, I think. Morning
Really?
time.
I have mine on Mondays. They
have one
like
right now. UX.
Oh, they do?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there another one on Thursday?
Maybe.
I have that one on my calendar too. I don't know why I have both.
I don't know the Thursday one.
Maybe it's two opportunities.
Weird.
Maybe one's
Yeah.
more developer focused, one's more design focused. I don't know. I haven't checked.
Okay. Wow,
But-
this is awesome. Thank you.
Consistency is certainly hard. I mean, something that I know that Holly probably knows more about is like even the search bar for like issues, it behaves differently if you're in a board, if you're in the list view. So even when components like look this similar, like they end up behaving differently, and getting that to be consistent, it's not easy.
But this is why your mermaid diagram would be so beneficial, because it's like we're all kind of interpreting how we should use components differently. Maybe it's because they're not designed or documented as well as potentially what you're suggesting.
It kind of feels more like a single source of truth on the code base side. Depends on where they got the search bar from.
True. Legacy
It's
code.
It's a pain point in plan.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it does have to do with like where the code is and how the code was built, and everything was built at different times by different people, and it's just one of those things. Libor, I feel like we haven't heard much from you today.
All right, still waking up here a little bit, so yeah, just echoing what everyone else said though too. Yeah, don't have anything else to add really. So
Cool. All right. Well, if there's nothing else to add, we can end this meeting.
See you later.
Have a great day, everybody.
You too.
everyone.